Welcome to the Cantina Cast, now a part of the MakingStarWars.net podcasting network. Go to MakingStarWars.net to check out all the cool Star Wars podcasts. Each week, the Cantina Cast brings you news commentary, scene analysis, literature, character dissections, and much, much more. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. It's good to be back talking on the podcast here. It's been a little while since we've recorded because of a few technical issues we had last time because, the podcasting gods like to throw you off every now and then. So I needed a break from editing and doing all things podcasting because it drove me absolutely crazy. But anyway, we're here to do the Leia Dissection, which is, in case you're new to the podcast and listening to the show for the first time or whatever, what we do on the Cantina Cast is we usually typically do these character dissections of the popular characters like Luke. We did Darth Vader, Obi-Wan, all of them. And now it's finally time to do Leia, which has taken quite a while. But in any case, I'm your host, Mike, and of course I am joined by Joe. Joe, say hello.
Hello there. It's good to be back, and we're a little bit. This is supposed to come out in August, Mike. So hopefully it'll be worth the wait for everybody.
Well, that's my fault because I pushed it back several times, and I was a bad host, I guess you could say. But we're also joined once again by Becca Benjamin. Becca, hello, and welcome to the show again.
Hey guys, it's been a while. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. All right, now before we get into the character of Leia, I just want to mention how far we've kind of come. And I'll throw it to you, Becca, in a minute. But here's the thing. As I was going into this dissection and thinking about things, Leia is a very prominent and important character, obviously. And so is her mother, Padme. But the women of Star Wars, at least with Padme and Leia, especially with Leia, her character wasn't in it as much as you think she is, in a way. Almost like Obi-Wan, he's in it, but he's a prominent character. But not, obviously, George wanted, Luke to be the focal point of everything at that time. But there was that time where he also wanted the lead character to be a female, and also he wanted it to be a small person at that time, too. He went back and forth with things. But I can't fault George because at the time, female leads weren't all the rage in a way. So Leia's role was, I don't want to say diminished, because that takes away from her character and what Carrie Fisher did, because she wasn't. But I'll say this at the end here is, I think, when I was just thinking about it before we came on air here, Joa and Becca, is that her character actually was probably one of the strongest in all of A New Hope when you first see her, because Luke obviously was still feeling out what he is and what he was going to do. Han was just, Han. And of course, Chewie isn't much of anything, but he's just roaring and he's in the background, although we're going to get into that with the Chewbacca dissection, Joe. But I'll say this. Her character was on par with Tarkin and Darth Vader at this point. When we see her, she may have less time on the screen and everything, but her character had balls and was like right in your face and didn't back down at all. Whereas Luke and Han weren't as, I want to say, assertive at this point, I guess you could say. So, Becca, just quickly, what are your thoughts on that and where we've come? Obviously, we got The Force Awakens. You got strong female leads and stuff. And, of course, with Rogue One, we got Jen Erso and stuff like that. But I'll throw it to you first. So give us what you think.
Well, going on what you just said, I wouldn't say she had balls. She has buns. But anyway, going into that.
Well, that is true, yes.
Had to say it. It's true. Like, if you probably in the beginning, when you first see A New Hope, I don't think too many people probably took out of Leia's character the way we do now from what we have now. But looking at it this way with all the other nuggets that we have that connect with her, she is a very powerful lead with short amount of time in A New Hope. And what she says, how she carries herself, and what she does really plays a big part in the entire saga. So I think a lot of people didn't give her enough credit. I think right now, Leia's character is taking on a bigger, not just a bigger role, but a bigger impact in the fandom, at least for me. Like, she literally, I've been saying she's my spirit animal now. So I think, again, looking back on it, we really need to give her a little more credit because she's right. She's probably, in my opinion, in A New Hope, stronger than where Luke is. Emotionally and probably even physically. If you look at the way she, she's right on target, literally, not to use that pun there, but I mean, she doesn't miss a shot. So again, it's just maybe I'm being too, pro-female in a way, but I think we had this time coming. So go Leia.
Yeah, all right. Well, Joe, I guess is this a case of less is more with her character in a sense? I mean, granted, it was the 70s and that's how things were back then. Things have obviously changed. But I'm just curious, the assessment with her being a stronger character at this point, or more assertive, I guess you could say. So take it away, sir.
Yeah, I think Luke really hadn't had much time to, your comparison there with Luke, that he hasn't really had the time to mature, or hasn't had to mature at as fast of a rate as Leia has. She's been, like in the Imperial Senate and stuff for years at this point, and the character's only 19 years old when we meet her in A New Hope. So, she's kind of had to grow up really fast, and I would imagine even before she was in the Senate, she had to grow up really fast because she had to get ready for all that. So I imagine by the time when she was 5 or 6, she was being shown the royal way and the proper way to you think of dinners and balls and whatever else they're doing on. I don't mean to say balls, I'm talking about different kind of balls, Mike. Like masquerade balls or something. I don't think they do it all on. They're fancy there, right? So but my thing is that I think in Han, I think he's just a big man child at this point, and Obi-Wan has had so many experiences, like he's almost kind of just almost fed up with certain things in the galaxy. So Leia's still kind of young and bright-eyed and hoping she can change the world from the inside out, or the galaxy from the inside out. But she's also got the maturity that Luke and even Han, even though Han's much older in age. So I think that's where it goes. As far as the screen time, I did notice that as well when I started kind of just jotting, because the way we do these notes is I just pretty much just jot down every scene, and then we just pretty much go through the whole movie of every scene that character is going to be in. And I noticed that it was, especially in A New Hope, there's a lot less scenes than when we did, Obi-Wan and Luke and Vader and Han. We've done all those that had this movie involved in it. And so it is interesting, but I don't know if that necessarily the screen time diminishes her character or anything like that. I think that Carrie used her screen time very well, I guess I would say. So,
all right, well, we're going to start with A New Hope. And of course, we know, of course, there's Rebels and stuff, which at the time we'll mention it when it comes up and stuff like that. And even the stuff that are in the comics, if it applies, we'll jump into that. And one of us will say something, because we all kind of, have a myriad of background with the comics and with Rebels and stuff like that. We all know what's kind of what when it applies. But mostly the timeline is based off of the movies and stuff like that. So we're going to go right from A New Hope, and we're going to start about when we first meet Leia here, is when she's in the escape pod. And of course, in your notes, Joey, you got that she doesn't go to the in an escape pod and takes off. She gives the plans to R2, allows herself to be captured. Is this brave? Is this smart? Well, what do you think? Because like you say here in the notes, if she was in one of those pods, are they going to kill her? Because, they would have sensed the life form and shot her out of the sky. So I don't know. I'll throw it to you first, and then we'll go back to Becca. So go ahead.
Well, I think it's a combination of smarts, because she knows that they can just blast her out of the sky. So that's why people aren't running to the escape pods. But she knows to put the droids on there, and maybe they have a chance. And while they're loading up, she's kind of, fighting off the stormtroopers. I don't guess she allows herself to be caught, really. I mean, she knows she's going to, I think. But at the end of the day, I think she doesn't allow herself to get caught, but she's fighting them off as long as she can, and then in allowing them to get away. So I think it's a combination of bravery, smarts, and we got to get these droids down there. We got to get Obi-Wan, so that's the goal.
Or Becca, is this more of the character of her willing to sacrifice herself for the greater good, which she probably learned more from Bail than anybody else as a mentor? I don't know. What do you think?
I was actually going to say that, actually. Yeah, I think at this point, when you're looking at just based on the characters of herself and Luke and even Han, which he comes in later, but if you look at them, she's already at the point where it's not about me. It's about everybody else. I have to do what's best for the galaxy, what's best to keep fighting, to bring unity back, to bring, the whole government spectrum back in order the way it used to be. And And that probably does go back to Bale. I'm sure he raised her from day one. And you see that a lot going, forward into the years, when she talks about her past. Absolutely. It was definitely, I don't want to say she was fed it or brainwashed it, but I think that's something going forward. What I love about this scene, though, and I know you've said it, and it's funny because I think we're on the same page with this. Again, even though we know George is not at the helm now, he doesn't have the steering wheel, so to speak. There is a beautiful symbolic or parallelism here in between her giving those plans to R2-D2 and that scene that we see in The Force Awakens, which is only in the vision of Luke kneeling down to almost R2-D2's height. Not that Carrie Fisher or Leia really had to kneel far. She's only 5 feet, 5'1", so she doesn't have far to go. But it's very, very similar. And I think in a sense, they did go back and they wanted to create that almost kind of the connecting the dots, keeping that going. It's beautifully done. And like you said, I think she was at this point, even at 19, able to think quickly without having to really sit there and ponder. She had that quick wit about her, like, okay, this is what I got to do. It's almost as if before she goes into anything, she always has a plan B. You can see that about her. And as we go further into this film, you can see that how she was like shocked how her so-called rescuers don't have a plan. So you can see this about her from the moment that we do meet her. She has always got a plan because she doesn't want to get caught. So,
well, very, very similar to her father. Now, I'm going to get this out because this is like the 800-pound gorilla in the room, because all three of us, I think we're very much on par with this. And I'm going to talk about when she first meets Leia here. And it goes back to what I said at the top of the show is she's, confronts Vader. She's on the same level. Like, she doesn't back down. Maybe she's terrified inside as she is later when her planet gets destroyed. But overall, she's very much stands up to him and Tarkin and stuff like that. But I'll mention what we've always said, the three of us have always said, is that she's very much more of like her father than she is of her mother, which plays into, later on when we get into this dissection, when we get into the Return of the Jedi and Bloodlines in Part 2 and stuff like that, where things really kind of solidify that, in my eyes anyway. So I'll throw it to you, Becca, first, is what did you think of the confrontation when she meets Vader? I think you're thinking similar to me, and I'm sure Joe is, but I'll throw to you and give us your opinion.
What I love is, looking at it now, after we have all this info now, versus from when I was 4. But looking at it now, I love that scene because I can totally see Anakin within her, and I can see her mother, because as though she's able to snap back at him, she keeps a very level head, which is just like her mother. She wears that mask. She doesn't show fear, even though she's probably shaking in her boots. She's not backing away. She lets him know, I'm on a diplomatic mission, and he's right back at her, but she doesn't cower. She keeps her straight face. She's looking straight at him. She's not showing any fear because she's like, if I'm going down with my ship. I'm going down with everybody. I am not backing down from him, and I think that stems again with what's already innate in her and also from what she's been taught. But what she's born with is the genetics of Anakin Skywalker. He's known as the hero with no fear. So right there, she does carry that a little more to me than Luke does. You could see it in her body language too. The way if you really pay, close attention now, going back, the way she makes her fists and the way she, pushes her shoulders forward, it's very similar to that of her father. But then when you see her stand up against Tarkin, you see that diplomat, you see that senator, that's more of her mother. So she's got a great combination here, but you can definitely see she's not going to show her true feelings. It's just not Leia. It's not what she's born with, and it's also not what she was taught to do.
All right, Joe, what did you think of their confrontation? Similar along the same lines of what we're thinking? I don't know. What say you?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that it's we talked about the same thing when we did the Luke dissection. We said, okay, is he more like Padme? Is he more like Vader? And actually, I think at least 2 out of 3 of us, when we did that final episode or whatever about him, 2 out of 3 with us. I don't know if you agreed, Mike, but I know I said it, and whoever we had on as the guest. So we had 3 different people on for that dissection, so I forget who it was. Sorry about that. But we actually lean towards Padme. Obviously, going back and you look at that, Luke's got, he's really strong with the Force, this, that, and the other. So that part of him's Anakin, the dark side part. But and Leia's got that kind of cold streak too. I mean, it takes her a while to warm up to like anybody, even like Luke. She's not like immediately like, oh, well, you said, she's, taking jabs at him. I don't mean to jump ahead, but I mean, you look at that and just based on what we're saying about it, obviously she's got both Padme, Vader, and I was talking to my mom last night, and I said, I told her I can see part of in me, I can see part of my dad and part of my mom, and I said maybe that's why I'm so crazy, because they're so different, and it's two forces in my brain that are just screwing me up here. So, but all jokes aside, when she is that quick wit, I think, where she's willing to joke, like with Tarkin and even with Vader, the things that she says, that sense of humor, even when she's angry, that almost reminds me more even of Anakin there. So, and little do we know, when the first time you watched the movie in 1977, that literally right there in the first, 5 minutes of the movie or whatever it is, that, the father and daughter are face to face there. And obviously, both of y'all went over it. She doesn't back down. And like I said, she's got that, I don't think, obviously, I think deep down inside, she's not a cold hearted person, but I think she's had to kind of create that mask, as Leia put it in a different way, that where she probably has, feelings and strong feelings and emotions towards people, but she can't let that out. She can't let people know. It's the whole Batman complex, or the Spider-Man and all this stuff, where they say, they want to be anonymous because they don't want people to go after the people they care about, and they don't want them to be in danger. And so Leia's probably used to losing people in this fight. Rogue One happens right before this, and God knows what's going to happen in that. So we don't know if she knew these people, were in contact with them, but we assume over the course of the rebellion starting here and coming to a head in A New Hope, that she's definitely lost some people that are close to her. And she's, that scar tissue, I think, kind of goes over your heart, in a non-literal sense. But, I think it's just a combination of those things. And she's, has a stand up. And it almost makes me wonder, I'll wrap it up with this. It almost makes me wonder, in a Senate hearing or some kind of other thing, has she come face to face with Vader before? So maybe she's not as intimidated by him as we might think, because unlike the Luke thing where he confronts Vader in Empire Strikes Back, I feel like that it's more plausible that Leia would have come face to face with Vader prior to this.
I would agree with that. And Becca, just to say, because we've watched Rebels, and of course Joe has watched Rebels, and we only saw her briefly in that, I think it was one episode or two episodes, where she's there and she's talking to Ezra, and they went back and forth, and they have the experience of loss and the weight of that loss, but she goes back to doing her duty. I just wanted to throw that in. What are your thoughts? And we'll go on forward here. I just wanted to throw and see what you had to say about that.
Well, yeah, we do know that really we do meet her briefly in a small arc. She's in Rebels season 2. And yeah, she definitely has a moment where she actually shows a little bit of sorrow, which is interesting because in A New Hope, she actually says, we have no time for sorrows, and they just go right into the plans, not to jump ahead, but to connect with that. So she's, again, it's something she's probably developed over the years as a mask, to hide away or push down those feelings, which again makes me wonder if that strength doesn't just come from lessons or doing it over and over, if there's something within the Force that allows her to be that strong. It makes you wonder, because she's able to shut that off. But going into that, we know that she obviously has met, when the rebellion's at its cusp and it's coming to a head, whether, right before Rogue One and right into A New Hope, she obviously has connected with rebel cells and whatnot, because we see her meet the Ghost crew, so she has met other cells. She's helped them in one way or another, obviously secretively, and probably through the help of Fulcrum and whatever, but she has seen loss. Obviously that has pained her, because it's hard to make connections to people that, I like them and I may not see them tomorrow because they may lose their life fighting for the same thing I am, and then in the end of the day, you're wondering, is that really worth it? Of course, to her it is. But you still feel there's still that sorrow there. And I can't imagine being at that age. Because again, think about it. Han's probably seen this type of thing being in the smuggler business. I mean, come on, people are dying every day. He's used to that, but it's not really a cause, but it's for different reasons, but he's seen it. Now with Luke, that's all new to him, so it's interesting to see how the dynamics play out in between characters just briefly in this one film, where they all are and with their age groups. So yeah, I mean, obviously she's probably came across not only Lost, but it's very plausible to think that she's actually crossed paths with Darth Vader. I can't imagine that she wouldn't have, being at her level of where she is within the Senate. I'm sure she has.
Well,
go ahead, Joe.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say, just bounce off of what Becca was saying there about comparing Leia to Han. We talked about that in the Han dissection where we really talked a lot about his trust issues, and that was like the major thread I was on in that whole those 2 episodes. I was kind of stringing all this together and kind of making my case as the episodes went on, that he was afraid of losing because he couldn't trust. He said he didn't trust Lando, so that's something that him and Leia actually do have in common. Now that Becca puts it that way, and I kind of shed some light, a different perspective, that I'm seeing it that way now, and we've had this conversation. So now it's almost like you can see why her and Han eventually there was an attraction there, because that was a common thing. Like they're both kind of, they both kind of lie to themselves about their feelings, and they try to bury their feelings deep down. Obviously, Han is a little quicker when he can't, once he starts to trust. That was the thing we always said about him in the prior earlier this year. When he starts to trust, he'll let people in. He let Luke in, and and he let Leia in, and he became basically a good guy because his friends were good guys, and he wanted to be around his friends, basically. So, and obviously a slightly different way for different reasons, Leia, shuts herself off to these things. So I don't know, but there is that, even though they're for different reasons, there's still that connection, that something they have in common. And, we all know relationships have to be built on something that you have in common with each other. So that could just be one more thing you could add to the list, I guess.
Well, I'll say this. Well, speaking of Leia here and being strong-minded, we'll talk about the torture scene where Dad decides to, get the mind probe there and start doing all sorts of weird things with her. And, I have the Sideshow collectible where the probe is there, and there's a lot of nasty tools on that, and I don't even want to know what the hell he did with it. But anyway, that's a whole other topic of dissection anyway. But my point here is, as you have in the notes here, Joe, is this the Force where she is resistance to the probe, or just strong-minded, or is it she's like mission focused and it's the mission and the rebellion that matters, or if it's something altogether? It reminds me very much of Rey, where she kind of knew, like the Force just kind of clicked on in her, and even Luke to a degree, and it's always there, and it amplifies her strength in a way where she's trying to resist someone probing into her mind or something like that. And I'll throw it to you first, Joe. What say you?
Well, I think we've kind of talked about like amplifications and stuff before. I can't remember exactly what we were talking about back in the day, but there's definitely something to that with the Force, where I think that the Force has the ability to kind of take your best or worst attributes and magnify them times whatever, whatever your M word count is. I don't want to say it, sorry, since we're talking about original trilogy movies. The M word is
midi-chlorians. I said it.
Okay.
I said it. Go ahead.
Doesn't bother me any, but there are people out there. So anyway, yeah, I hate to just say always like, oh, it's the Force, that's why they're strong, because like I feel like that's, oh, you just have a superpower. Like, so I feel like that you're taking some kind of the agency away from the character. Obviously, Leia chooses to be strong and chooses to be the person and stand for the things that she does. She makes that conscious choice. She obviously does, have the Force. It comes from a strong bloodline. No pun intended to the book, but. So I think that she is strong-minded, but we remember about like Jedi mind tricks, they only work on the weak-minded. So I would think if you're pretty strong in the Force, it's going to kind of give you that kind of that extra layer of protection, because we look at Poe, we don't think Poe is weak-minded at all, I don't think. And Kylo Ren was able to read his mind pretty easily, which is pretty surprising. And maybe that talks about the strength and the force that lies in Kylo Ren, but that's a discussion for another day. But, Vader's obviously trying to use the force, and he can't get it out of her just the same way Kylo couldn't get it out and get it out of Rey. So once you come up against the force and, the force is kind of butting its head against each other, but shouldn't that have given Vader a clue right there, I wonder?
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Wouldn't he have felt it? Because he does feel it later in the movie, and he's got to be standing right now. So anyway, I don't want to get into technicalities and get into continuity issues, but...
Well, it brings up one question, though, Joe. Is this the fact that maybe she was trained sort of by Bail in the fact that, like, okay, to resist things... Maybe Yoda gave him some kind of life lessons here where he would have to, train.
I almost wonder in a war, and Bail seeing the things he saw in the Clone Wars, whether he was trained at that point or not himself. I'm sure that he brought some people in and said, if we are captured, we're going off to war here. With this Rebel Alliance and all this, and eventually it's going to turn into a full scale war unless we get killed before then. But Bale's got to think, we do this in real life, Mike. They put, cyanide capsules in people's teeth that are in the military. If you get caught and they're torturing you for information, you kill yourself, right? That's, there's, I don't know how common that is, but if you watch movies, it seems to be pretty common. So, I don't know if that speaks to real life, but I imagine there is. Look at, Hitler, like this.
Well, it happened in World War II. Yeah.
And I'm not just saying that's probably the most famous instance where he didn't want to be captured, so he killed himself. So, there has to be, I'm not saying that Leia was going to commit suicide. That's not where I'm going, but there are measures of protection that I think that Bale would have taken, not only for himself and the people that were fighting for him, but obviously his daughter. She would have been the first one to be trained, I think.
All right, Becca, what are your thoughts here? I'll just say this, Joe. I think it's a combination of both here, and I think there had to be some sort of a training, but I'll leave it at that, and we'll throw it to Becca. So, Becca, please give us your 2 credits on this.
Well, to not really counter, but I guess I am. You both agreed that for continuity issues that Vader didn't get a hint. Well, he does. If you look at his line to Tarkin, he literally says her resistance to the mind probe is considerable. And Tarkin almost basically entertains it, very similar to Snoke, where he was surprised that she resisted Vader. It was very similar. I can't remember the exact line, but there was that little conversation, but then they were interrupted into other things. But
yeah, good point.
But he does notice it, and he's thinking, again, you have to remember, at this point, he doesn't think anyone survived. Padme died. So he doesn't think he has any offspring, so it's not like that. It's not like he's feeling any of that, but he's definitely wondering about what she was able to do because, again, not to jump ahead, but that scene is detailed specifically in the Bloodline novel. You know what she goes through. She suffers a considerable amount of torture. How she survived it, again, I can only put weight in the Force. So I'm going to go with that answer for that part. But then you guys were also mentioning about, oh, shoot. I lost my train of thought on that one. So you guys.
That's okay.
No, but you guys were countering that, but there was something else you guys were also mentioning.
The training of mind control or whatever.
That's it. Again, that was definitely, to me, in my opinion, a paralleled scene in The Force Awakens to A New Hope. Again, Rey was able to resist, much like Leia. It's just, it doesn't have to be specifically trained. I think, again, it's innate. Like you said, you were just saying it, Joe, that the Force basically magnifies those attributes that you have, bad and good ones. And this is one of them. And this is definitely something Leia's always been able to do. And that is connect, with somebody, whether it be someone who she is close to or not. And I think she was able to somehow tap into that. And maybe, possibly, she was able to use Vader's own abilities against him. Very similar to how Rey basically did to Kylo. We don't know. Again, whether or not Bail had any training advice, I think more or less Yoda might have gave him some instruction, signs to look for, when taking on a Force-sensitive child, especially one coming from the so-called chosen one, what to look for maybe because she was Anakin saying, look for signs of aggression. And if that happens, do this, who knows? That's a possibility. Then again, who knows how far that went into, because what's interesting, again, going back to parallels, what they do with Leia, what they decide to do. I mean, obviously Bail says with us, she'll be loved with us. They basically did the same thing with her that Palpatine did with himself. They hid her in plain sight. It's interesting because she rose into this category from being a princess, into being, a senator, and then obviously as she goes forward into her career into a general. So again, by then she's not hidden, so to speak, but they take Luke and they do basically what the Force did with Anakin, and he's hidden, completely hidden. No one even knows who he is or where he's at. He's on a desert planet. So it's kind of interesting there when you see these parallels, because you would think, being that she's at this position, people would notice different things about her, how she can connect, or her fast reflexes or anything. But it seems like that's gone amiss. But then again, think back to the prequels and no one really noticed anything odd with Palpatine. So, but it's interesting when you piece these together.
Fair point. Of course, that ties in with Joa's theory on Leia becoming an empress in 8 or 9 or something like that. But we'll get into that when we get to the end of this dissection series here. But speaking of her mind, because this is like a theme, and obviously the theme here is that she's obviously a strong-willed woman here and very brave and courageous. And the first thing is, she lies to Vader and talking about Alderaan. And, of course, she's shocked when they blow Alderaan up. But she's still very, I want to say, stoic and very steadfast. She doesn't kind of, whimper. I mean, she is torn up on the inside. But unlike Luke, who's crying over a guy you just met like 5 minutes ago, she just lost her whole planet and family and everybody she's known her entire life. And she's still able to function and do what she needs to do, because obviously a lot of that had to do with Bail saying, you got to do your duty, similar to what Padme said. And, when Obi-Wan and Anakin having the conversation, and Anakin says she would do her duty and stuff like that. But I'll throw it to you again, Becca. What do you think of this? And obviously she watches the planet get destroyed and stuff like that. So what do you think?
Again, I think that just goes back to what she was taught, in a sense where she cannot, display emotion. And again, you have to wonder if this comes from genetics in a sense too, because unlike her father, who basically wears his heart on his sleeve, he shows every emotion when it happens at every second. This is a Padme thing. I mean, she's able to stay, like you said, almost stone faced. Like she, goes out a little bit like, no, you mustn't, we don't have any weapons and whatever, but they still do it. And she stands, she doesn't collapse. She doesn't shed a tear. She stands there. Yes, she's horrified, but like you said, she doesn't completely break down. So much so that when, like you said, Luke loses Obi-Wan, she can nurture him and mother him. She's not even concerned about those that she lost. Her own mother, again, EU stuff, Breya would already been gone prior to that. But anyway, who knows? But Bail, she lost her father. So it just, again, shows you where she is at such a young age. She is wise beyond her years when it comes to emotions. Again, you have to wonder, because her Force ability is with emotions and connections and with the mind. So you wonder if the Force was already starting to take hold at that point, or if it's just her lessons learned throughout being a senator and being in that type of political atmosphere. It's an amazing thing to see, because again, she is younger than them, even younger than Luke by a minute or two. So it's amazing to see her go from losing everything. I mean, it's gone, everything, to being able to care about someone else's needs over her own. So it just shows how strong she is, and going forward, how much of a burden she will carry on those little shoulders, how much of a cross she's going to bear. She's an amazing woman, even at that early years of 19.
Well, that was very similar to Padme when she was comforting Anakin when he was, sad and scared and everything else. But I'm going to jump real quick, Joey. You can chime in with your thoughts on this subject here when she witnesses the planet get destroyed and comforting Luke and everything. But I want to also mention, because as Becca said in her thoughts there, is that her being more mature, and it goes back to what I said earlier, her being actually more stronger and more mature than Han and Luke at this point. You know how us men are. You know, we don't really grow up until we're, I don't know what, on a deathbed, I guess you could say. But in a sense here, she's a stronger person. And I just want to bring up her relationship with the boys here, because she saves their skin. She, leads them out of the Death Star and everything. And she's even wise enough to say, they let us escape. And Han's all blind and thinking, oh, well, hey, we got away, blah, blah, blah. And Luke is just Luke. He's like, doesn't know what the heck he's doing there. He's all sad about Obi-Wan there and stuff like that. So, Joe, I'll throw it to you. I threw a lot there at you, so take it away and give us your thoughts there, and then I'll go to Becca.
Yeah, I guess just one note. I mean, Becca pretty much went over the blowing up of Alderaan pretty well. There's not a whole lot for me to really add besides just repeating a lot of the stuff that she said, so I won't do that. I guess I would just point out, just to bounce again off of what she said about, Leia putting others' needs before, and then that scene you just talked about where they get, where they're on the Falcon there and getting away, and Luke's like all depressed crying over Obi-Wan. And, I don't know, maybe it's been like, it didn't happen just that second when Alderaan got blown up. It had been, some amount of time, we don't know, but it probably wasn't very considerable at all, maybe like a day or something, because the debris was still flying at them when they came into the Death Star. So it had to have been recent, and they were still in the vicinity of Alderaan. So, I mean, it had just happened. So, and then he's grieving Obi-Wan, and she's consoling him, and she just lost people that she had known her entire life. So I'll just reiterate that, to illustrate Becca's point that she sees somebody else in pain and, comforts Luke there when she should probably really be the one that's being needs to be consoled or needs to go to therapy or something about this. So I'll say that. And then obviously I did want to bring up just the banter between her and Han, because obviously it's classic. And, I'm sure we talked about this quite a bit on the Han dissection, but, just when Han says he doesn't take orders from anybody except one person, him. And she's like, I'm surprised you lasted this long, or however exactly she puts it. So, and then she takes a shot at the Falcon, pretty much you came on that thing, you're braver than I thought. So just that quick wit, just the joking manner. I mean, she's not walking around like all sullen and frowning and stuff. She's just kind of annoyed by everything. She's pissed. And so I think that's some kind of a weird combination of Padme and Anakin like put together, because I think that they would both be wanting, from the perspective of Padme doing her duty, but Anakin would probably be wanting revenge. And I think it's maybe a little bit of a mixture of both. She's ready to kick somebody's ass, and she's not, looking to hang out too long. So she's like into the garbage chute, flyboys, all this stuff. So I threw a lot back at you there, but just kind of my overall feelings of that. It's just the banter and stuff is just, if you watch The New Hope right now, you're going to laugh out loud, like at those scenes when they're trying to escape the Death Star, because she's just, the way she makes fun of Han is just, it's just classic.
Well, yeah, of course it's classic, and we all loved it, and that was amazing. But is it more like, again, here she is. She goes up against Han, who's older and supposedly wiser, and then Luke, who's, Luke again. I keep putting Luke on the back burner here. And of course, she hangs with the boys, is what it basically comes down to. She faces Tarkin, kind of stands up to him, obviously stands up to Vader and Luke and everybody else. She's like, and she rescues them. She gets them out of there. Of course, and like I said, she's wise that, they're letting us escape. Obviously, that's why the stormtroopers missed everybody. But Becca, what do you think of this? And then we'll move on to Empire Strikes Back.
Well, again, I think it shows a lot in her personality traits. If you think to where we see Leia, especially now with all the new info out there, because a lot of it centers around her, just, flip through stuff, look through the films, look through certain books, look through comics. Most of Leia's camaraderie are men. I think, again, it's that personality type. I don't think she does well with the whole la girly stuff. She wants to be, in a sense, like her father was, on the front lines. I think she, in a way, proves herself more when she's thinking on her feet, so to speak, not behind a desk. Leia is one of those who wants to not only kind of put out there, okay, this is what I want to pursue so we can all be a better galaxy, but she also wants to be the one to actually campaign it, if that makes sense. So she's, I don't know, she's just always, in a sense, always on the move. Leia's not one to sit still. And again, going back to what Joa said, another commonality with Han. Han doesn't sit still. He's always got to be doing something. Of course, that takes him further away. He doesn't stay put in one spot, so to speak, very often. But Leia, too, you know, whatever she's thinking, she's got to kind of put it into action, so to speak. And you see that basically throughout the duration of the films that she takes part in. You know, she may be, even if it's not her idea, she's well on board with it and she's got to be in it. So right there again, looking back at things now after knowing what we know throughout the entire saga, especially having to do with the Skywalkers, you see, I think personally with her, you see more of both parents and a mix of Bail. And I think those are all probably the best attributes anyone can have in this entire saga. And it works well. And I think we're going to see, not to speculate, but I think we're going to see that come to light, that in a sense, I hate to say this and I hate to put Luke down, especially because I know how much you like him, Mike, but I think we're going to see that the true legacy is going to be carried through with Leia. She's just a stronger one of the two, and he even says it to her. So, but that's just me. We'll see what happens.
We will. We'll see what she created, a son that murders everybody and all that stuff. But anyway, I don't want to pick on Leia. I love Leia, of course. And yes, I do agree. She is a strong, as I even mentioned going forward, like as I've said in this episode, she is. She's stronger than Han. She's stronger than, I would say she's on equal par with Leia. I mean, with Tarkin and Vader here, where she stands up to him and sees them as equals. And even they, to a degree, look at her the same way, in a way. I guess you could say in a twisted way. Vader probably not. He's just kind of like, doing his thing. He's chilling. He's the bad guy in the black suit there. But anyway, we're going to jump into Empire Strikes Back here and move this show along a little bit. We don't want to get too long. But obviously, Leia has grown within the few years. I don't know, what is it, a few years between New Hope and I can't remember. I always get this wrong. It might be within a year or so, something like that.
I believe it's a year.
Yeah, probably within a year. I'll say a year. We'll just go with that for the sake of going for that. But obviously, she's more of a commander here. She's, the early seeds of her becoming a general. As you said, Becca, she likes to lead the troops. She's got to be on the front lines, that type of thing. She wants to get her hands dirty. She doesn't want to be sitting back like a Mon Mothma in a way. And that's another female character who's strong, but we don't see much of her as well. But I'll just put that there. And of course, I disagree with Mon's politics when we get into, aftermath and all that other stuff. I have issues with that. But that has nothing to do with her being a woman. But anyway, obviously, Leia's taking on a bigger role here. She's a general. She's leading people. She's got a lot of say, obviously. She's not like Mon, who's sitting in the back doing other things, planning things and assembling things and stuff like that. But, we see Leia is obviously, and this is where I think her character really shines in Empire State. Her and Luke, both of the twins here, is because Leia does a lot of things, and almost like similar to what we see with Obi-Wan. There's a lot of acting with the eyes. And we've mentioned this before, Joe, when we were talking about, I think, quotes or something like that, where we talked about when she's in the carbon freezing chamber, she does those eyes and you see a lot with it, and especially in the beginning where Leia's in the command center and she hears Han's ready to leave and stuff like that. And you see those eyes. They're a little cold and concerning and kind of that pissed off look like, you shouldn't have said that because now your wife's mad at you type of look. I don't know. What say you, Joe? We'll start with you. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when she first overhears, Han saying he's leaving and all that, and then he kind of says, well, I guess this is it, Your Highness. And she's just like, that's right. Just again, like you say, just kind of cold. It's that tough exterior that we were talking about earlier that she's kind of giving off. And then when he kind of storms out, she kind of has to give in at that point because she does care. And, and we see that, and she starts storming after him, and she gives him every reason in the world to stay except the one that he wants to hear. And that's probably because she's just being stubborn. So, I mean, I guess right here, I don't know if we call it, a flaw. I mean, because when we get into these character dissections, Mike, we have pointed out a lot of character flaws, and we don't mean necessarily with the story with consistency or continuity or anything. But look, they're people. and all people are flawed in some way. Nobody is perfect. So to have a perfect character would be to have a boring character, an unrealistic character, and it doesn't work, and it's not believable, and it doesn't make for a good story or anything like that. So I think right here we're seeing one of Leia's kind of flaws, if you want to call it that, is being stubborn. Now, maybe it's wise for her not to get involved with Han, so maybe her stubbornness is helping her out in a way. But I think in the long run, I think that stubbornness is probably one thing that is a flaw, because I can't think of too many with Leia. I mean, with Luke and, even Obi-Wan and some other things, and Han, obviously, and stuff, and Vader, we kind of put them through the ringer when we did these. And there's not that much of it with Leia, so I have to point something out, I guess, in this. And that would be the only thing I can point to is stubbornness, which isn't always a bad thing. I mean, that stubbornness, helps her in these confrontations with Vader and Tarkin, and when she was in the Senate, and I'm sure in a million other situations. But when it comes to love and friendship, that stubbornness is a detractor for her, I think. So, but yeah, so she obviously is denying her feelings here and all that. So, and she still doesn't give in, even when Han prods and prods and prods, and then he storms off again. Probably not.
Yeah, well, Leia, Leia, I mean, Becca, what do you think? I'm calling you Leia here. Well, I guess you're the Leia of the podcast here. So, what do you think of this? Like between the Han and Leia's relationship here is kind of, it's that, that weird kind of, I like you, you like me, but you drive me nuts kind of thing. That back and forth where they kind of yell at each other, like an old married couple, I guess you could say here. And of course, she is hiding her feelings, which kind of goes back to what we said with the torment when she was being tortured and everything. She kind of hid her feelings there too. But this is obviously a different thing. This is emotion with the heart and everything else. But well, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I absolutely, for all the space married or Star Wars couples, however you want to put it, couples that we see on screen, this is probably the best banter and dialogue we ever get in any of the saga thus far. For me, second in line now is Hera and Kanan, but we won't go there. I love this because this, again, to play off what Joa says, yes, she's definitely stubborn, and yes, she's definitely in denial. She likes him. She does, and she likes Luke, but I think, again, for two different reasons, and that's something that I think plays a big part in this moment. She's struggling in between what she feels for both men. She wants them both close to her. It's apparent. She worries about Luke just as much as she worries about Han. It's right there. It's evident, and it definitely fuels Han quite a bit. But not to jump ahead with that, I think this is very similar to her own mother here, because Padme was very similar in the beginning with Anakin. I'm a senator, you're a Jedi. It's just not possible. And I think it's a very similar situation. She is Princess Leia, Senator Organa, and you're Han, the smuggler. You owe money to, Jabba the Hutt. I can't get mixed up with you, which I think plays into her line with him, which we'll see, going further into the film is, I like nice men. That's her trying to tell herself, again, I need to put that wall up. I need to have that barrier up. This isn't going to work. Again, this relationship, again, connecting with her own parents that she's not even aware of. I mean, she's walking that same path. It's amazing. She knows, in a sense, it'll destroy who they are. I mean, right now, who they both are, it's just not a good mix, regardless of how she feels and regardless of how he feels. And I think that's why she reacts almost nasty and cold, is because she's trying to turn him away so he won't look at her like that, and won't feel that way. Because I think for Leia, it would be easier if he snubbed her and just let it go. And then it would be one last issue for her to contemplate during more important things, which is her duty. And that's, to do what they're doing against the Empire. I mean, to her, that has to come first, not this, you want me to stay, because of how you feel about me, puppy dog look and whatever. That's not Leia. It's interesting.
Well, is this more of an easier way for her to just blame someone else so she can get on with it, so to speak? I guess that's what you're kind of saying,
yeah.
Right?
She needs to basically focus on the bigger picture, and that is the galaxy at large. This is not important. Personal stuff is not important. And that's what I think without her coming across and saying that, again, it parallels a lot to what we see, going into the prequels. I mean, it's very similar, but just the banter's there. It's more, in a sense, comical, but yet you can sense there's a lot of romantic tension there. And I think it played out better for this couple than it did for Anakin and Padme. Not my own personal viewing, but I think the fandom at large. What's interesting though, if you, like I said, how she's paralleling a very similar relationship. If you look at who they are and not mixing, I'm not saying, Jedi and all that stuff, but just again, where they come from, two different worlds, so to speak, and kind of like women are from Venus, men are from Mars type thing. That type of scenario. She grew up in a very loving environment. She had two parents who were very supportive, very encouraging, basically would give her everything she wanted, and yet she still eventually is going to choose a relationship that mirrors her real parents. It's amazing to me because, again, it's not about being in love or having those arguments. It's the fact that, like I said, she grew up watching two parents together all the time, so to speak, where she's going to basically mirror her real parents where they weren't together. They loved each other, but how often were they together? So it's interesting. She's trying to avoid walking that same path out without knowing that that's the path, obviously. But I think it plays into what Joel was saying. She's very stubborn because she's she's basically telling herself, I like him, but I can't like him. But without just being straightforward to tell him why, because let's be honest, if you were to tell Han that, what do you think he would say?
Well, I'd say something sarcastic.
Exactly.
And,
So she's trying to, again, play around the bush, and go the other route.
Let me just throw in there, because then also the ball would be in Han's court, and then he could, I mean, this is the way, these budding relationships, especially between two people like this, are going to be. And I just think it's funny, just real quick, when you were saying all this, Becca, about how Leia's trying, really, isn't that kind of a gender reversal, though? Because usually that's a stereotypical trait of a man would be to be mean to a woman so you can drive her away because you're too much of a chicken S to tell her, hey, I'm not interested in a relation. Now, obviously, Leia is, but just the way you described it, it's like, hey, in 1980, we were already getting gender reversal roles here for Leia. So, I mean, look, George was ahead of the curve after all. Right. So. And so anyway, I just found that to be funny, but yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Why aren't people honest? Because it's hard to be honest sometimes, especially about feelings of the heart. So I mean, and then and then you don't want to give Han almost like you don't even want to give Han the satisfaction at the same time, which is weird to say, but I think we've all been there at some point or another.
Well, I think they're both similar like that, though. Yeah, I think they're both similar in that way. Like, I need to keep the upper hand in the situation. I think Leia's programmed that way because that's how Bale kind of taught her amongst the being in the Senate and everything. And Han's that way because it's his survival amongst these smugglers and everybody else. He has to be that way. But we'll move on to that, and we're gonna get into the other elephant that's in the room, which is the awkward kiss that we all know about now, but they didn't know about at the time. And this goes back to Leia kind of wanting to keep the ball in her court, Joe, as you were saying. Well, what did you think? I guess we should just talk about the kiss. What did you think of the kiss, I guess you could say, knowing what we know? I don't know. Do we even want to mention what we know? Because we didn't know until Return of the Jedi. I don't know. Take it away, sir.
Well, the problem is we can go back and we're sitting here tying all this together for George and, how this and that. But look, he didn't know. He didn't know that they were going to go that route until the next movie. I don't think George was trying to give us the weird Game of Thrones, all this weird, historical literature and all that kind of weirdness with the incest and all that. I don't think that was really what he was going for. But I mean, even back in our Luke dissection, I believe it was Mark who was saying stuff about because they're twins and just separated twins, and there's been documented cases where they meet each other randomly in the world, and sometimes they even unknowingly fall in love or some just odd stuff. I mean, there's documented cases, I guess. I can't remember exactly where he was pulling that from, but I mean, there's a million.
Hey, real life is weird, man.
So I mean, it's over so many years, it's probably had to have happened, I guess, right? So, I mean, that's always the one thing, because Empire now is considered, the creme de la creme of all Star Wars movies. It's I mean, for most people, I'm not saying it's everybody's favorite, but, a large contingency of the fandom, that's the gold standard. That's the movie you point to. Even if it's not your personal favorite, it's hard to argue that it's actually overall the best made film as far as just everything in it, the dialogue and the story structure, everything like that. I mean, it's hardly even arguable in my opinion. Doesn't mean it has to be your favorite, but anyway, I digress. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, Mike, I don't know if I've ever. This is like the one subject in Star Wars. I don't know if I ever have touched on it really too much. It's just one of those things where it's just when people bring it up and joke about it on internet or wherever we're at, at a convention or whatever it might be. Like, it's just, I'm just like, this the one time I just don't talk about it. I don't have any feelings about it really.
You're just going to keep it in the closet? You don't even want to talk about it? You don't want to mention it at Thanksgiving?
It's just that it happened once. We're not going to talk about it. Like, let's just forget about it. No, but I mean, look, at the end of the day, she was doing it in front of Han to make him extremely, extremely jealous. It obviously worked. She had feelings for Luke because they've developed a friendship. There is a natural closeness between both of them because they are twins unknowingly, and they both are strong in the Force, and that probably creates another huge connection. It goes back to what Becca was saying, that how Leia is probably very confused because she thinks she likes Luke, but at the end of the day, she's confused by what those feelings really are, which it can happen. We've all been young. We've all, when you have a crush and you think it's love and you don't even actually even know the person, you just kind of see them from afar and develop crushes, but we call it love and things like that. So, again, it's a mistake. It's a flaw. It's, a mishap that happened. And I think I just take it and I look at it that way. But her motivation was to make Han jealous, obviously, stating the obvious.
Well, yes, correct. And again, it goes back to, I think, like I said, she wants the ball in her court, like you had said earlier. Becca, what are your thoughts on the awkward kiss that we all know of now? And obviously, I think George, I agree with Joe. He wasn't really thinking that. He had this idea in his head of what things could be, but it was very, very malleable at that time and stuff like that. So I'll throw it to you. What did you think of the awkward kiss and the obviously the fact that she is trying to make Han jealous and to try to, it almost reminds me, not anything to do with kissing, but like, you got that sibling, that older sibling that, always knocks you down or someone that you just want to make jealous just to, jab at them. Because Han is cocky, as we've mentioned on the dissection of Han and stuff like that. So I'll let you take it away.
Well, my 6-year-old self at the time, I loved the scene because before there was such a term as shipping, I was shipping Luke and Leia. So I, 6-year-old self was very, very happy. Now looking at it, I don't consider it a flaw. I don't look at it as an awkward moment because you have to remember, she doesn't know, he doesn't know. She was definitely doing it to prove a point to Han, to basically have the upper hand at the end of the day and to shut him up, which she did all the above. Luke was the one who benefited from it because if you take a look at his entire expression after it's done, he couldn't be happier at the moment. And Han just basically pats him on the shoulder and he says, "Take it easy."
Well, that's all he could do.
Right. So in a way, Luke gets the benefit of the whole thing in between the two of them. And yes, she is struggling because granted, going into something that's EU here or Legends, there's a book out there called, I believe, Splinter of a Mind's Eye, or I can't know if I got the title correct. But in that book, it's Luke and Leia on an adventure and they go head to head and toe to toe with Darth Vader. But it's in that novel, her struggle between her emotions for both Han and Luke. She's thinking of them both in a romantic way. So again, I know it's not canon, but it makes you wonder because like I said, when Luke is out, prior to that moment of the kiss, she is concerned and even, doubly worried when it's, Han out there too, because what if she loses them both? And you can see that going through those eyes of hers. I mean, she tries not to show any feelings or anything, but when it's the two of them, I think she feels like everything that she stands for would be lost if they both go. I think she would, well, not to jump really far ahead, I think she could survive emotionally with her own self on the inside, losing one, but I don't think she could bear losing both, if that makes sense. Not to go off on a tangent, but like I said, at that moment, that entire kiss shows exactly where she is at that moment. She is very she's struggling with how she feels about both men, and at the same time trying to keep it away from everybody else and holding it all at bay, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. We're going to move on, but I first want to, well, I'll just say this again. Of course, we see Leia. She stays to the end and gets rescued by Han, and so to speak. Again, she's there to the end. She's more concerned with the rebellion than herself. I mean, that's kind of a, throughout another theme that goes throughout. But we'll get into the point where, obviously, because it kind of ties in with what we got here, because we're talking about Han and Leia here, is where she actually starts to kind of confess her feelings for Han, and does he win her over? Does he? He could have gave up here after Luke got the kiss and that, but he's still persistent. He's, Mr. He's an old smoothie, I guess you could say here. But I'll throw it to you, Becca. What did you think of this here, where she finally gives in? She stops fighting. It's almost like Anakin in the sense where he just gives into the dark side. All he cares about is Padme. He's going to give into those desires and, damn with the consequences, so to speak. And she kind of does that here, but on a lesser scale, if you will. So I'll throw it to you.
Well, it's an interesting scene. I mean, because first you go to, like you said, when they go through the asteroid belt and, things happen and she kind of falls into his arms and she basically makes it known that she's not comfortable. Very similar to Padme telling Anakin that I'm not comfortable with you looking at me, but she's not comfortable being touched by Han. But that to me goes both ways. I think she's not comfortable because he makes her nervous in a good way, but she doesn't want to admit that. Not yet. And it's funny because his line, the banter's perfect with "that's all I have time for, sweetheart." And it really, again, for someone who we don't see any emotion right here, man, she is miffed. She was just like, how dare he say that to me? To me? Like, you see this on her face. So when he does corner her as she's fixing things on the Falcon and they go in for that kiss, I think all that is coming to the forefront, everything he just said. And he knows I got her because I was able to do to her what she did to me, playing it off where he doesn't really want to go that route, which really he does. So I think he did that whole reverse psychology on her at that moment, and it worked. You see Leia basically become putty, and she melts for Han. And at that moment, I think the way it was created, what woman wouldn't have? I mean, just the way he talks to her and the way he's going in, I think at that moment for her, not to say it's a flaw, but to her personally, I think because when they're interrupted by 3PO, gotta love him, as Han would say, goldenrod, she literally walks away, totally excuses herself out of that situation so it can't happen again. And we don't see that again until Han's life is in jeopardy, really. There's that little moments, I don't want to jump ahead, but really she basically, that interruption saves her from her own feeling of her own character flaw, for herself. I think in a sense she was mad at herself for showing a sign of weakness, so to speak, because this whole time she's been battling it and being tough and that cold exterior, as Joa says, So I think him playing that reverse role on her, basically being her towards him, and now it's him doing it to her, she kind of realized, this is what I'm doing to him. I think it was kind of that moment. It was a moment of weakness, but it was a good moment of weakness, and it was well needed.
All right, Joe, what do you think of the Han actually turning the tables here or putting the ball back in his court? And maybe this is where the attraction is for both of them in a sense, where they're feeling at this moment very equal to each other, and they accept who each other is and all that other stuff. So what do you think, sir?
Well, I mean, everything Becca said, pretty much right on board with it. I go back just when they're actually flying through the asteroid field, they're running from the Empire, they're hiding from the Empire, doing all this. Like the adrenaline is pumping. That's the one thing where people always made that comparison between how Anakin and Padme fell in love. They're sitting by a waterfall on Naboo, and Han and Leia fell in love flying through an asteroid field than with the Empire shooting up their butt, basically. So, the excitement level, I mean, the emotions that were going into that probably also played a large part of them finally both her giving in and then Han, accepting, and reciprocating that. And that's where they finally, because once they get to Bespin, they're, kind of lovey-dovey at that point. I mean, at least Han feels like he can be, and Leia accepts it. But I mean, he's kind of kissing on her and, kissing her on the forehead and things like that. He feels like it's a relationship at that point. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that the emotions, the adrenaline, the fact that
she did kiss him on the cheek, though. I mean, yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I think that the fact that she knew that they both could die, Chewie and the Falcon could all get blown to smithereens. That she kind of says, well, what the hey, I mean, if it's now or never, I mean, maybe it's not the smartest choice. And Becca says she doesn't see it as a flaw. I'm not, I mean, look, we all have that flaw. I mean, if you want to look at it in that way, which is to care about other people, I hate to say it that way, but I mean, I don't necessarily believe that. Some people might see it as a flaw because it does make you, as Becca said, weakness. That's what some people might like to look at it, like a character from another movie, Davy Jones, who says, "Love, a dreadful bond." So one of my favorite lines of any movie ever. And I just, when I'm in a depressed mood, like I always think of that line, so when he's going to kill Will and all that, not to get off topic, but, kind of brings it in for me a little bit here that some people do see love and attachment as a weakness. Oh, the Jedi do too. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. They see it as a weakness. So,
well, the Emperor sees it as a tool, though. Because the Emperor used it as a tool to get Anakin. So, I mean, some people use it as a manipulation. Others use it as, a weakness.
That's why the Jedi would have, we're getting off topic, but that's why the Jedi would have seen it as a weakness, because they knew the dark side, or those who wield the dark side, could use it as a tool against their Jedi. So anyway, I mean, but you get hurt. When you care about people, you end up getting hurt because either you die first or they die first. And, and then you have to feel, you have to grieve for them and stuff like that. Something I know all too much about, and something we all know, about. We've all lost somebody that we care about. It's to what extent, how close were you to that person? And eventually, if you live long enough, like how they say about the heroes and villains, if you live long enough, you'll see yourself become the villain. If you live long enough, you'll lose everybody you ever cared about. And that's a horrible thing to think about, but that's one way to look at it, is when you're not close and you don't have to care about people, you don't have to get hurt. And, I'm not saying that that's necessarily Leia's motivation. I think was more of Han's motivation before he basically did get attached to Luke and Leia, as we talked about in the Han dissection. But there's always going to be some of that in there when you've lost so much. You're afraid to let anybody else truly in, and it's a scary thing. So, I think all that, the adrenaline, the energy of the Empire chasing them, and everything else I just said, I think it's just all a big mixture and, a big melting pot that was all thrown in there. And Leia just said, Han's a pretty charming guy. He looks like Harrison Ford. So, I mean, it's hard to, you got to give up at some point, right?
All right. Well, you transitioned into where I wanted to go next, which is Leia and Lando's interaction. And it's almost like in the Empire, as we go along with even from A New Hope onto this point, you see that they're kind of like, we see more of the softer side of Leia, her warming up and everything. But then she goes back to being cold when she meets Lando, because obviously she doesn't trust him. He's kind of this weird guy that comes up to her and says, well, you belong here in the clouds, kiss on the hand, doing the old smoothie thing and everything like that. So it just she snaps right back into her default mode here, which is, I'm just bringing it up for the comparison of the contrast, really, of between when she's around people for a long enough time, like Han and Luke, and that and she cares about him, and then she all of a sudden goes back to, almost like Anakin being cold and keeping standoffish when certain things need to be done. Or you can say even Padme, when there were certain things at certain points where she had to be cold and stuff. So I'll throw it to you, Becca. And your thoughts on Lando and Leia here?
Well, I think she knows right away that he's just a big player, and Leia doesn't have time for crap like that. In my opinion, she's like, it doesn't do anything for her. It's not impressive. It reminds me of a Vader's line. I believe it's Vader's line. She doesn't have time for those pleasantries, so to speak. She's there for a reason. Let's get on with it. I mean, she goes about it very polite, but it's funny because as polite as she is, she snubs him with the whole, it's Leia. She doesn't give him a last name. She doesn't give him a title. Leia. That's it. Right there, to me, she's basically letting him know, like, lay off, Obviously, Han does this whole jealousy mode and shows his territory and takes over and basically takes her hand away from his and leads her into where they are on Bespin, But it's interesting because when you see that, it makes you wonder, as Leo, wow, that's Leia and Lando mixed together. When Lando watches them enter, he's basically his gaze stays upon her. At least in my opinion, he watches her walk away. I don't think he's watching Han so much. But that's just me. And as we know, just even seeing him now within Rebels, we saw him, and again, it's the same charisma he carries. And it doesn't matter which female it is. That's his way of persuasion, so to speak, to get what he wants, is he's going to flirt with you or make you feel good about yourself so he can actually manipulate and get his way. So it's an interesting thing because Leia picks up on that to me right away. You're not fooling her. She's not going for it.
Well, it's funny. Every time it, I don't know, it was in the 90s, the early 90s, mid 90s or whatever, and you had that song by Rico Suave there. I always think of Lando when I hear that song. I don't know why. He just seems like, obviously we know he's a con artist, but there is more layers to Lando than we know, and we're learning as we go on here. But he is a con man. He's trying to, get the upper hand himself and trying to make money and all that other stuff. But Joe, I'll throw it to you quickly. What do you think of their relationship or Leia's reaction to him and how she just quickly shuts him down, basically? And he still tries. You got to give him credit. Typical guy, right?
Well,
but go ahead.
And obviously she picks up on it. And I think that the reason why she's even more adept at being able to pick up on who Lando is because he's friends with Han. And Han even says he doesn't trust him. He was like, and he is my friend. But I know he says that a little later before the first introduction. But just the fact that he is an old acquaintance of Han Solo gives her every reason not to trust Lando. So I think that was probably her first tipping point there. Obviously, she's come to trust Han as far as, I don't want to make that sound like she doesn't trust Han at this point. Obviously, she does. She knows that Han is not going to allow anything bad to happen to her. He's not going to take advantage of her because she knows that he cares too much about her to do that. And at the end of the day, Han Solo actually is a good person at heart. It just takes, you just kind of have to get kind of get the rust off, I guess you could say, or kind of shine him up a little bit before you see that, at the end of the day, Han is not out. I don't think there's an evil bone in Han's body. Yes, has he killed people? Has he shot people and all that? But I mean, it was all for self-preservation. Did he throw a guy into the mouth of the monster in the forest? Sure. I mean, yeah, he's killed people, but
self-preservation, man.
And I don't think he has any necessarily ill will towards anybody unless you did ill towards him or his friends. So I don't want to get back into the Han dissection here, but so I just wanted to illustrate that I do think that Leia absolutely trusts Han, but anybody he's been associated with in the past, I think that should have been her first tipping point not to trust him.
Well, I'm going to just quickly mention this, is that I think Leia is living in this little she's warming up to this fantasy of her and Han at this point, but she also says to him when they're looking for C-3PO, and she says, "Oh, and then you're gone." Like, she still is a little bit grounded in reality of the situation, because Han probably was going to go pay off Jabba and everything else, but he probably would have tried to take her with her, but she, of course, again, I got my duty to do, and that's all that really matters, and that sounded really weird. But anyway, we'll jump forward. We'll get into the carbonite scene, which is one of my favorite scenes of all time, of all Star Wars, because of the lighting, the sound effects. Leia's eyes in this just were captivating. And I love when the actors just they act in the way with their emotions of their facial expressions and their gestures and that. And she nailed it here, kind of like you, Alec Guinness did when he was doing Obi-Wan when he was talking about Luke's father there. Same type of thing in a way. But anyway, I'll throw it to you, Becca. What were your reactions to, obviously, she kind of confesses here, I love you, and finally gets it out. The cat's out of the bag. I finally admit to it because things are about to go really bad here. So I'll throw it to you and go from there.
Well, again, it's like you said, it's probably one of the most emotional, most intense, and again, has the best dialogue in probably all of the 7 films that we have so far, just a scene alone. All the actors were on point. Of course, they had that freedom to do their own ad-libbing and get their own feel for their character in where Harrison Ford is anyway. But that moment, especially now, like I said, having what we have now, when you look at it's very similar to episode 2, where Padme basically breaks down and just lets her feelings out. And this is almost where Leia is. I think it's pretty much the same situation. It's going to end bad. I just need to tell him now. Get it out there. He needs to know now because I may not get any other opportunity. It's got to come out now. So she does it. She drops her guard down. She admits it. What I find is interesting because obviously when you first see it prior to the prequels, you don't really pay attention to all the little nuggets, which is a moment where Darth Vader and Leia share that glance, that glimpse. And yes, it's very short-lived and it's only a very few seconds. And granted, Darth Vader's wearing a mask, but there is so much emotion there. And I can't help but wonder till this day if he sees that similarity where I remember going through this. I had this.
I think so. I do. I
Not to
think
mention
so, yes.
she's wearing white, very similar to how Padme was, a very similar style. I mean, the way her eyes are and her hair, everything mimics what he's already lived through because at this moment you see, I call it a moment of empathy here with Vader. Granted, he still does what he does. He's got to test this out on Han Solo. So it's works well for Luke Skywalker, his master's prize, so he's got to do what he's got to do. But, when Chewie goes nuts and they're all ready to basically fire at Chewie, he basically, Vader steps in front of Boba Fett and basically touches his weapon like, no, it's for me, for Vader to be that way. Again, I'm not calling this a character flaw at all, because let's be honest, Vader is known for what? If you're in his way, if you're doing anything that he doesn't like, he's going to choke you, he's going to kill you, whatever. He's knocking you out. But this moment shows a little bit of a sign of Anakin, because if you follow the timeline, we know up until a certain point, or actually he already knows, never mind. So I just kind of countered my self there. So actually, no, he doesn't have an Anakin moment there. But according to comics anyway, we'll go there. If you've all read the last comic of Vader, then I guess I'm wrong. But I still wonder it. I mean, there's that moment where you think he's connecting on something that he remembers in the past, because it is very similar. But again, the dialogue to me is better. The scene in general, the lighting, the sound effects, everything that's going on, it's so on point. Just, again, the exchange in between Leia and Han, she basically tells him that she loves him I love you. And he just, I know. Total Han moment. I mean, he could have said the same thing back, but I think honestly, him saying that meant more to her, knowing because that's him, than him saying, oh, I love you too. And then boom, he's frozen. So it's an interesting scene. Again, how George was able to do that, which to me is still genius, because you're reminded during certain moments, even though they happened before, that the next movie came out. It's amazing how he was able to link those so the fan or the viewer can say, wow, that is awesome because this parallels this and this goes with this, which strikes up what we're doing now, a discussion, and it can keep going because really nobody's wrong. It's just point of view and how you look at something. There's so many different ways to view this. And again, I think it's beautifully done and probably one of the best scenes that we have throughout the saga.
All right. Well, I guess if anything in this whole first part 1 of this dissection, we're reiterating Mike's ring theory, if anything else. Joe, so what are your thoughts on the Carbon scene? And I know you love this scene, especially when you reference it to the Empire of Dreams, when you mentioned the line, where it was kind of on the fly type of thing. So I'll let you take it, and then we'll get into wrapping up the show and stuff with Leia hearing Luke and stuff, and we'll go from there. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is the ultimate tipping point we've been getting here, and I've been talking about, in the the beginning of the movie sets up where she's still being stubborn, and then Han knows the real deal. Obviously, he knows in the very beginning, and then it culminates to this point that they're in the asteroid field, and the kiss happens, Bespin, they're kind of being lovey-dovey, and then now this scene happens, and it's just kind of the ultimate culmination and the perfect layering, or whatever you want to call it, between the beginning and the end. I don't want to get too technical with the movie aspects because we are trying to talk about the Leia as a character here, but she goes through this arc from learning about what is important to her from even episode 4. And then, and it's a very different movie, and her character is kind of in one way, and the relationship is established with Han and Luke. Obviously, we go a lot deeper, especially with Han. And this one and Luke will get way deeper next time in part 2 with their conversation, which is just obviously a poignant and amazing conversation when they have that moment on the Forest Moon of Endor. But, it's just a perfect arc. And we talked about this with the arc of Han Solo. And we talked about, and I proclaimed that after we did that dissection and we had the conversation with Ted and you, Mike, and I had my opinions and I heard everybody else's, and I came to the opinion that Han Solo has, arguably maybe as great of a character arc as anybody in Star Wars, because of where he starts, where he ends, and it kind of all flips in between, and he kind of goes back and reverts and then fully comes back to where he ended up after Return of the Jedi by the time The Force Awakens ends. And I would even put it up against the arc of Darth Vader himself, who the first 6 movies are about. So I just thought that character was that well done. And we see this here, especially in The Empire Strikes Back, where Leia is very much going through this arc, and she's learning that, yes, the rebellion, defeating the Empire, that is her duty. But at the same time, if she's not happy at the end of the day, then what's the point of any of it? Because what if they defeat the Empire and she's just this lonely woman with a bunch of Lothal cats or something, like in her house,
or Ewoks.
Yeah, she's still living with the Ewoks. Oh, can you imagine that catastrophe? So they'd be braiding her hair all day, like she couldn't stand that.
That's the next Netflix series, is Leia and the Ewoks. But go ahead, continue, sir.
But you see this arc come, and we've talked about it, and I don't need to reiterate everything. So we come to this scene with the carbonite. She glares at Vader, the look of sadness when Han, is dropped on the floor, and she shakes when the carbonite is dropped, and there's that thud, and she's like visibly shaken, and she's, the look on her face, the physical acting that's going on there, and everything else, and then when Han tells Chewie, you have to protect the princess, you can't do this here, and she looks up at Chewie and almost like a pleading moment, like Han, they're taking Han from us, like, you have to stay with me. And she's appealing to Chewie in the way that you have to appeal to Chewie, and that's to his emotions, because he's a big teddy bear animal guy. So how do you talk to Chewie? You just go right to his emotions and say, hey,
and that thing understands you. But go ahead.
I need your help, Chewie. So, and he calms down when he gets that look from Leia. So just everything that happens, Becca mentioned the look when she looks at Vader, and just everything else. So I mean, it was just it really was pretty much, it was the climax of the movie, really, for her, not for the entire movie, but it was that climactic moment for her and Han, even though they still have a couple more things to do in the movie. But that was you just see her, the relationship itself obviously came a long way. And we've talked about it here tonight. Look how far the character herself came by giving in to her feelings, which is, it's not a bad thing. I mean, to try to be happy and to love somebody, is not a bad thing. So I think she's growing as a character as we see her up to this point.
Well, you could make the argument that she's probably the most balanced character in all of this, throughout the whole thread of her appearing in the saga. She's like the balance. She's almost like the father in the Clone Wars. She balances everything, and she realizes, Han gave the worth. Han and Luke gave her the weight and the meaning of what the rebellion really is, because she lost her father. She could have gave up right then and there and said, frig this. There's really no point to this other than living for my father's legacy. But having Luke and Han and Chewie and even Lando to a great degree now, and the droids, it gave it weight and meaning now. Like, she had a new purpose in a sense, like, oh yeah, I need to continue this through, because that's what matters at the end of the day. Who I love, who I care about, and the rest of the galaxy, same thing. They have people they love and care about and stuff like that. So Han brings that out in her, as well as Luke to a degree. So I just want to point that out. And then now we'll get into where the Force kind of really awakens in her. I know we've mentioned some points here in part one where we think like the Force kind of helped out with the torture. And apparently, like I think we all kind of agree, or well, at least me and Becca do, with the stare that Vader and her have there, where something's going on there, and we just can't really place it, but we know there's something there. But obviously, Luke calls out to her. She hears him, and she has that look of like, I've kind of been here before. Like what's going on? I kind of know there's something else here, and whatnot, and that's the way they go. So Joe, I'll throw it to you. What say you here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, you put it perfectly, obviously as a pun, but yeah, the Force Awakens in Leia, like really at that moment, that's where it's fully fledged. There's no debating it. It's not, oh, well, maybe the Force helped her in the torture scene. Maybe this is going on. Maybe Luke is talking to her telepathically from miles and miles away. She's receiving a Force message of some kind, and for her to be able to receive that message, I think is obviously a clue that he doesn't call the Han. He doesn't. I guess maybe he knows Han's in carbonite. Maybe he notices that when he's trying to get the Vader. I'm not sure, but he doesn't call the Chewie. He doesn't call he does try to call the Ben, but then who's the next person he goes to, because he does have that strong connection with Leia. So he asks Ben for help. Ben's told him, I can't interfere for whatever reason that is. We've debated that before. So then he calls to Leia, the next closest connection, the person he thinks that will hear him. And why not, he doesn't call the Han, I mean, I think it's hard to tell if that was Han in the carbonite, if he's just peeking behind the corner. Han saved him on Hoth, but he doesn't call the Han. He doesn't call after calling the Ben, he goes immediately to Leia.
Well, Obi-Wan kind of did him a favor there with my theory,
Yoda.
But yeah.
He doesn't ask for Yoda's help. Like, he could say, hey, Yoda, can, you pilot a jet take a jet out of a swamp and fly it over this way or something for me? No, he doesn't do that. He calls the Leia because he knows there's something there. He knows there's that connection. And obviously that connection, as you say, awakens. And then she demands that they go after Luke, and Lando's like, hey, no. And Chewie pretty much puts Lando in his place. Which is
all right. Yeah, go ahead.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much there is really to say to it. I think that's all I can say is that is the undeniable point that she also has the Force. We've seen other hints in the movies up to that point. At this point, it becomes undeniable. The audience at this point knows that she is also a Force user. So, and then it goes on to the fact that because Yoda and Obi-Wan talk and say there is another. So then I'm sure in 1980 that was driving people wild, like in the before there was podcast and the internet. Like I almost wonder how people were speculating. I guess they were writing letters to each other.
Yeah, that's exactly what would happen. Imagine that. Imagine if we could do that whole Empire Strikes Back's cliffhanger. Well, it's not really a cliffhanger. We would have. That would have been interesting. It would have been similar to Rey, who's Rey's parents, that whole thing. We won't get into that here. That's a whole other thing. But Becca, what did you think of this? Obviously, where her awakening very similar to Rey. There's a lot of things where she mirrors Rey here. What are your thoughts? And then we'll wrap it up and we'll move on.
Well, I absolutely love this scene because for me, it mirrors that of episode 3 between Anakin and Padme. This is what I call a true joining of the Force, and I've written about this a few times already. It is Leia's moment, as Joa said. This is her, as he puts it in the notes here, in your face moment. Absolutely. There's no denying she has the Force. Untrained like Rey, yes, but she knows the Force. Like you said, Luke doesn't call to anyone. He tries, obviously, Ben, then realizing he knew, when he left Dagobah, that Ben could not help him. He could not interfere. So the next person that he gravitates towards is Leia. But as we know, his insights serve him well. so he just knew, he was attuned enough that he knew he had a call to Leia. I think in a moment, those eyes, that look that we're talking about, is a combination of instant shock and then revelation. She knows there's something wrong, obviously, and that he is definitely, like, she's not hearing wrong, that she knows it's Luke, because she even says Luke. It's under her breath at first, but she knows it's him. She knows exactly where he is, and when she says that, it's very direct. It's more of an order. We got to go back. Lando argues with her for a second, and she goes right to Chewie, like, turn the ship around. We have to go. And that's when Chewie, yells at Lando. Obviously, she cracks the whip here because she knows what she feels. Again, I think it's a moment of shock for her and revelation, because she's really not sure what's going on. All she knows is that she can see Luke, because let's be honest, she knows where he is because she can not only hear him, but she sees him. She sees that image of him. It's apparent to me. And again, it's very similar to episode 3 because, again, it's twilight time. It's a sign of transition. It's a sign of change. She is changing. Again, you can also use that whole pun that Mike used with the force in her is awakening, because, again, that whole symbolism's there. You can play that out with almost any force connection or true joining in the force in any episode of the films. It's the same type of thing with the twilight. Light is turning into dark. However you want to look at it, or twilight can be taken as dark turning into light. And in this case, maybe that's what it is, but it's a beautiful moment. It's a shocker because, again, if you go back to the first time you ever saw that, you're like, well, what's going on here? How come she can connect with him? Because we don't know anything yet, and it's just beautifully done. Her acting skill for Carrie Fisher, to me, is so on point in this film. It's almost ridiculous because you feel so much empathy for someone who's the whole time almost wearing this mask, even though it's more of a feeling mask, unlike Darth Vader, who is completely wearing, so it's more of a figurative thing. But it's just, I guess it's so impactful for her character that this happens, because this leads into everything else that we're going to see and where she stands in the whole Skywalker legacy. Again, showing how much strength she has, because like Rey, she's tapping in and she's untrained, so it's an amazing moment that she's able to, again, rescue. Though, you know what I'm saying? It's interesting because, once again, Luke was on his way to rescue them, where they were on their way in A New Hope to rescue her. She, again, rescues them again, in a sense. So it's kind of interesting, but it's a great scene.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for part 1. Part 2 will be probably in 2 weeks, because Joe and I need to get together next week and go over all the news that has happened in the last week. And, of course, Rebels, we got to talk about Rebels with the world premiere and season premiere. And, of course, what's going on later tonight with episode 2 and stuff like that. I'm going to dispense with the pleasantries. I'm not going to say where to find us and everything, other than you can find us on makingstarwars.net. And, of course, you can go to thecantinacast.com, and you can find us there and all that other good stuff. And I'm going to play the outro because I want to make my life easier in editing. That's the show, folks, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with, next week with part 2 or whatever the hell. You don't know where to find us. I'm out of here. Later, guys. You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.